As you can tell, we have an amazing panel that has great experience and can help us tackle this issue of web and mobile accessibility. To you, is there a difference between web and mobile?
As a user of both platforms, in most cases, the question that arises is, which one would you prefer? First as an individual, but also perhaps importantly, as a person with a disability. I use both because I use my computer, for instance, for work, banking and other services. But I also use my phone for these different activities, whether it's work or banking and all that. But unfortunately, we have some services which are available on both platforms, on the web and on mobile applications, but have different accessibility standards, right? So as a person without a disability, it would be much easier to prefer one. I have colleagues who say, I don't put my email address on my phone because I don't want notifications popping up when I'm not working. But if I don't do that as someone who's visually impaired, I won't name the system that we use at work, I will miss out on so many features because the mobile accessibility is better on the mobile platform. So as a person with disability, we are left in the position where you have to have both. And if you don't, then you're almost doomed, to say the least.
Apparently, as a journalist, my life evolves around digital journalism, and that entails using both the web but also the mobile. That means I make use of my computer, I make use of my cell phone to have access to services. Most service providers have hardly considered persons with disabilities. In fact, I don't really know of a website in Cameroon that is really accessible to persons with disabilities. Now, even knowing how to use the web, knowing how to use the mobile, sometimes even having access to information is a serious problem, especially for those of us who are living in a conflict-hit area, that's the northwest and southwest regions of Cameroon, also known as Anglophone Cameroon. We are in an armed conflict which is nearing a 6th year, with thousands already dead, including persons with disabilities. Now, having access to information, especially living in these areas, is very important because sometimes information is communicated that you need that information for your own safety. But because you are not able to access those services, you find yourself wanting. But I believe that when we start having conversations like this, it serves as a catalyst, as a sine qua non, to get the bells ringing, to get these service providers on board, so that together we could struggle to change the status quo. Yes, Rome wasn't built in a day, but I don't also think that it took up to a century. So we've been into this business of having companies, having organizations, having governments subscribe to providing accessible services to persons with disabilities. And I believe that it was about time that the issues of the day were no longer decided by speeches, by absolute majority, but by reaction backed by willpower.
You've brought up a really good point, and I'm glad we have Chris and Kevin here, about the importance of content. So there's web and mobile accessibility. Your mobile app can be accessible. But what about the content? Is it properly structured such that a screen reader can be able to read that content in a meaningful way, that the person who's blind is able to make sense of what's on that application?
Changing content is a bigger part, because if your content's not accessible, if it doesn't kind of comply and meet the standards, then the assistive technology can't interrogate that content. So there's a part of the standard says all images need to have alternative text that explain the image. If you've got that, then that's part of your content, and that's something that will improve the accessibility. It's part of the program. The interesting thing about that is it's not just a developer problem. Alternative text, you might be adding alternative text as a content writer. You've got a content management system, you upload a web page, you create your web page, you drop it in. How do you add in the content? And it's all of a sudden it's not a developer responsibility, it's your responsibility as someone who is adding that content. And that diffuse responsibility comes across in lots of different ways, whether that's the alternative text, or adding captions, or creating a good heading structure for a page. All of these are an important part of the accessibility standards, and an important part of ensuring that content is usable by people who are using assistive technology.
I think accessibility checkers for content has become much better. You can go and develop a document in Word and check it for accessibility. That's something in the last several years we've been able to do. So it is improving, but we've still got a long way to go if we stay on the topic of education, just working with the publishers. So most electronic textbooks right now are not fully accessible, and a lot of them still have to be remediated as they come from the publishers. So there's just a challenge with whatever area that we're dealing with, whether it's finance and banking and getting your banking information accessible. So I do think that we're seeing a shift in education and around document accessibility, but we've still got a long way to go, and a lot of that has to do with the original content providers, which are the people writing that type of content.
Let's take a step back, just for our audience to be able to understand what we are even talking about. Sometimes I feel like we're getting a little bit technical, but let's bring it home. So first off, what is web accessibility? It's when all people with or without disabilities can access the same information and perform the same functions, regardless of what device they're using, whether it's Android or not, or iPhone. It should not change. But also, it doesn't matter what type of assistive technology they're using. So it's as simple as that. So when we talk to businesses to make their content accessible, we are not asking for anything special. It's making sure that the needs of persons with disabilities are included as part of that. This goes to Presley and Wilson next to me. Beyond the technology, what obligations do the states have, especially African countries, when it comes to international law, requiring the use of accessible platforms?
We've not really got, I'm first of all talking in the context of Cameroon, any national laws on inclusive technology. However, Cameroon is signatory to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities 2006. Unfortunately, this convention, which calls for the meaningful inclusion of persons with disabilities in every sphere of life, unfortunately, when it comes to the digital space, digital technology, Cameroon is still behind, just like other African countries. But at least there is hope in the horizon, because on this very ground, I'm talking about Nairobi, Kenya. Last year, during the third edition of the Inclusive Africa Conference on Digital Technology, the digital standard was officially launched, and I hope that this serves as a takeoff point for other African countries to follow suit, for the continent to also at last have some guiding principles that could ensure that everybody, in fact, that could guarantee equitable access to digital technology. But I want to say that it requires also efforts, Irene, from persons with disabilities themselves, because we are not only talking about policies, about laws, but we are also talking about their willingness to effectively make use of these resources. Because it will be meaningless if a lot of resources were concentrated, I want to say, around ensuring that persons with disabilities have that independence, they have that leverage to tap from from inclusive technology when they themselves are not making effort?
Internationally, as he mentioned, we have the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It's one of the human rights instruments that has received so many ratifications in the whole world, right? Because we have instruments on all other human rights or categories of people. And the convention has specific obligations. So for instance, Article 9 of the convention speaks to accessibility in all spaces, including digital accessibility. It also speaks to, Article 21 also speaks to access to information, including through the use of ICTs, web platforms, and so on and so forth. So African countries should have measures to implement these obligations, but the gap is often in implementation. So most of these policies are doing a lot of shelf help, and as Kingsley said, as persons with disabilities, disability rights advocates, and generally as stakeholders, we need to advocate for this. And as a lawyer, I would even say perhaps we have very little litigation on this space.
I'm just wondering, when can we get the rest of the Africans to contribute, because they are a major user of the World Wide Web?
Africa's in a unique place because of its mobile-first approach to a lot of things, and that's something that's maybe not as well represented in the guidelines, in the supporting material around the guidelines, that would be really good. W3C is a member-led organisation, and all of the content that we produce is created by members, for members. We kind of shepherd and guide as an organisation, but part of that is, part of the important thing about that is getting good representation from across the world. Otherwise, we're not really a World Wide Web consortia. We're kind of a limited consortia. So if anyone is interested in participating, it would be really welcome, be really appreciated, and it's really easy to do. Any organisation can become a member, and that supports the work that we're doing and drives it forward. And I think the other thing, hopefully, that we're going to explore soon is improving our translations. So translating some key materials and guidance and background information to make sure that it's available in as many languages as we possibly can. So hopefully Enable are going to help us in moving that one forward.
It's exciting to hear we are having an impact across the continent, and that's amazing. And it's always about learning from each other. I think for me it's been a long journey. I'm still learning. I keep saying disability, tech, complicated. So, but if we move forward together, we can achieve more.